Camille, you ready to? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started by having me begin. We could allow some time for folks to join us for today's amazing presentation. To begin, I want to say thank you for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Ebinger, and I direct the Office of Engaged Learning. The Office of Engaged Learning supports both undergraduate research and campus-wide entrepreneurship. We are so excited about today's roundtable, and who will be introducing our esteemed guest today is my colleague, Camille McCallum. Camille is the program specialist program designer for our entrepreneurship programs that include corporate and social impact, creative arts, and even ministry or ministry entrepreneurs. And with that, I want to say an extra big thank you to Tracy Ann Allred. Hi, Tracy Ann. Thank you so much for your partnership as we explore this new aspect of entrepreneurship here at SMU, and as we have all these amazing people come to us in our community. Sorry, those are my pups back there. So thank you, and to the Perkins School as well. Camille, I'm going to pass this off to you so that you can introduce our guest. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen. We are so glad to be here with Rachel Roberts today. Rachel is a member of the incubator at SMU, where she's involved in all of our programs and in growing her company, American None. American None is a first of its kind organization dedicated to serving the fastest growing non-religious demographic in our country, what she calls the American Nones. She's deeply motivated to helping people in this category really discover what it means to be a nun and to find themselves outside of organized religion. Rachel is not new to the study of religion. She actually has a master's of theological studies from the Perkins School of Theology. She grew up in a Christian cult environment, and after having a kind of on again, off again relationship with Christianity, really decided that it was her true identity as a nun. And so she is helping people who are experiencing some of those same things with that experience. And so we are so excited to hear from you today, to hear about your company and about the nun experience. So Rachel, please take it away.
Thank you, Camille. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to the incubator and Jennifer and Tracy Ann and everyone to give me this opportunity to speak to you all. It's a special privilege to be able to have this conversation because the very topic of being non-religious or not specifically affiliated with a particular religion has been taboo for most of history. So it's pretty groundbreaking to even be able to begin to have this conversation. So I consider SMU and Perkins to be quite progressive and open-hearted to be able to have this conversation. As we begin, I have 4 questions or topics that I'm going to cover, and then of course have time for Q&A as well. The first thing will be, am I a nun? And there's an interactive quiz I'm going to ask you guys to take in a moment to determine if you yourself are a nun. Statistically, there is about a 1 in 3 chance that you are. Secondly, I'll tell you a little bit about American None, both as a business proposition and as a community organization, because they're 2 things that work in tandem with one another. Thirdly, I'll ask the question, why should I care? So why should you care if you're a nun or if other people are nuns? We'll discuss that. And then lastly, we'll conclude with, what do I do now? And what are some action steps to either be involved or help further the conversation if it interests you? So to begin with, I am going to share my screen so that you can see what I'm looking at. And I'm assuming that most of you probably have your phones on you or a laptop where you can open another tab. And I want to encourage you to go to AmericanNun.com, this beautifully designed website, and then scroll down to about midway on the homepage where it says, "You may be a nun, take the quiz." And I'd like to just give everyone, it won't take you longer than probably 60 to 90 seconds to take the quiz. And so much contrary to my nature, I'm going to keep my mouth shut for about a minute and let you guys do that. And if you have finished the quiz, when you finish the quiz, just maybe raise your hand, and then that way I'll just kind of start to get the pulse that we're there. Okay. I'll give you about 15 more seconds. Okay, so I'd be curious, maybe you guys could put in the comments, you know, whether or not you were scored as a nun, a rising nun, or not a nun. There's no right or wrong answer. This is not a judgment. You don't have to share if you don't want to. But I will say regarding the quiz is that the questions in the quiz were all derived from research that I've done in terms of what the hot topic issues are for people who choose to identify as nun. It's also worth noting just right out of the gate that when a person identifies as nun, firstly, most nuns don't know that they are nuns, but it's not a rejection of spirituality necessarily, or God necessarily, or even Jesus necessarily. It's the organized religion piece is the primary piece that people are saying I don't resonate with anymore. So now that we know that we're nuns, and let's see if I want to look, I don't know if I can see the comments. I'd like to be able to get a sense. Camille, can you see the comments?
Yes, we have here. I'll just kind of call some out. We've got 1, 2, 3 nuns in a row, a rising nun, another nun, a nun and done, rising nun, and 2 other nun and done. So lots of nuns on this call.
Okay. All right. Now, out of that, I would also be curious to know how many of you knew that you were a nun, or knew that there was a term for this space that you're in. So if you knew that you were a nun, or knew that the term nun, either yes to either of those 2 questions, if you could put in the comments, yes, that would be great. And then Camille, when you get kind of a sense of just the general assessment there, I'd be curious to know how many yeses we got.
Let's see, I'm seeing 1 yes, 2 yeses. I felt like a nun, but did not know there was a term. So very excited to get the email about coming here. Jake, who said when he heard nun, he thought N-U-N, joining the comment section.
Yeah.
Or thinking of it in terms of being unfundamentalist or ex-evangelical. ex-evangelical.
Mhm.
My first time
Yeah.
hearing.
Okay.
But we had
Well-
4 yeses, and those seem to be like similar to the same people who got none, like hard none and dones.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. Well, so we're going to now, I'm just going to quickly review some.
Cash is not accepted.
I think we're getting some feedback there.
Should be
Okay. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to do a quick overview just of the demographics and just to give you a snapshot of who nuns are, and then we'll breeze through that and go into, we'll have a Q&A section and then go into American Nun as a social impact company that fuels movement. So firstly, technically speaking, most simplistically, a nun is simply someone who selects none of the above as their religious affiliation. This is a term that's been in use for about 20 years, but has only been in use mostly by demographers and also by some sociologists, and then some religious leaders also know the term because there's definitely a movement within institutionalized religion to want to gather those nuns and bring them back to the fold, because from their perspective, the nuns are kind of wandering in the desert. So, but the term nun has not really permeated the social consciousness yet. That's one of the objectives that American Nun aims to change. All right, so let's see. Now I want to change the slide. There you go. Okay, so some demographics for you. The nuns skew heavily within the millennials and the Gen Z generation, topping out at about 40%. I myself am Generation X, so my generation was kind of the tipping point where we started to see more traction in this direction. And while nuns definitely to be a nun, it has nothing to do with your political party. In today's environment, it is true that generally speaking, they are left of center politically. They tend to be more Caucasian, and they live in urban environments, and then also on the east and west coast of the country. So basically, wherever there is a concentration of diversity has really been a force that has propagated this movement. Most of the nuns have left mainline Protestantism, and most nuns consider themselves spiritual but not religious. And this last piece is what is really different from, say, the atheist movement of the 20th century, because the atheist movement of the 20th century was a rejection of religion entirely and a rejection of the concept or belief in God. But nuns are in this space where they don't go that far, but they are just kind of disenchanted with organized religion. So as you can see on the left, what they primarily decline is organized religion, but really even above that, what I personally believe after my years of researching this is that it's really labels that they don't like. And this is parallel to the movements that you've seen in other facets of our culture, where labels are starting to have be less restrictive, whether it's gender issues and other kinds of things, where we're seeing a transcendence above restrictive labels. Right now, there is estimated to be, you can see the estimation of nuns down here in the bottom right. I usually round it up to about 90 million just to be conservative, but if I'm doing math, I round it up to 100 million because it's easier that way. Because I was a theologian, not a mathematician. All right, here are the 4 primary sociological shifts that have given rise to the nuns. Like I said, it has really come to prominence with the millennials and Generation Z. And so it's just a matter of the religious beliefs, and some of the practices have become less potent for these younger generations in terms of being transmitted from the older generations. The information age has also basically rendered or weakened some of these religious beliefs, particularly as it comes to what you see on the bottom 2 corners, issues surrounding diversity and social justice, because many of the religious beliefs that are not inclusive of diversity and inclusive of social justice issues are reasons that people are saying, I just can't be a part of this anymore. All right. These are the top 7 reasons for leaving organized religion. And please don't confuse religion with spirituality. These top 7 reasons are a synthesis of research that I've uncovered through the Pew Research Center, as well as Dr. Elizabeth Dreischer from Santa Clara University, who wrote a fabulous book about nuns. And if you just take a moment and look through those top 7 reasons, you may find some things that you resonate with. It's very important to me whenever I do speak about this issue that I make it clear that even though these are the top 7 reasons that people give for leaving organized religion, in no way do I personally, or does American Nun as a brand or an organization, suggest that all religion or all religious people are these 7 things. That is not the case at all, but these are the top 7 reasons people identify for leaving. One of the other differences with being a nun versus, say, how people generally conceive of being maybe an atheist or being a really religious person is that they just simply want to live their life in a way that reflects their sense of spirituality. So it really is a way of life. And trust me, after my theological education at Perkins, I know that that's the same way that Christianity is meant to be lived as well. But unfortunately, there's become a disconnect with many of the nuns with how they see what's being taught and what's being lived within organized religion. And so therefore, they're saying, I just would rather live my life according to these truths and these principles that I know, but not be so concerned about adhering to organized religion. Some other research has been done that indicates what kinds of lifestyle categories. So we're talking about the way they live. These are some of the top categories that are really important to nuns in terms of living meaningfully. So some nuns are uncomfortable with the idea of sometimes even the term spirituality is uncomfortable for some nuns, but the idea of living meaningfully is something that everyone can relate to, regardless of whether you consider yourself spiritual or religious or agnostic or however you want to identify yourself. I don't think there's really hardly anyone who would say they don't want to live a meaningful life. And these are some of the top categories of the way that nuns like to live meaningful lives. And this is one of my favorites, is fun. So in very simple terms, you may ask yourself, well, it sounds like nun is kind of an umbrella term for spirituality, and it encompasses so many things. What is spirituality if you're a nun? I have boiled it down to this very simple premise that it simply means connecting to something greater than yourself. And what's beautiful about this is that it allows for many different interpretations. So for some people, that would mean, it could mean relationship with God, and Jesus is the conduit to have that relationship. For some people, it may mean involvement in an AA or an Al-Anon group, or it may be the principle of love, but that something greater than yourself is the baseline definition for spirituality for nuns. And then that allows room for extrapolation based on a person's personal experience. What nuns are looking for is something practical, something that's going to help them stay connected to something greater than themselves, but do so in a very practical way that adds value to their lives. They're not looking for woo-woo. They're not replacing organized religion with New Age. So nuns are not New Age. New Age is its own category. And they're looking for inclusivity. They like a diverse exposure to people and ideas and sources of information. So a nun would be can be just as fulfilled doing yoga and maybe doing some Sanskrit chants and hearing a truth, a quote from Buddha as much as hearing a quote from Jesus. And so it's not so much about just one particular way. It's almost more of, I see truth in many places. And then lastly, these are the three, what I call priority profiles. And what I mean by that is three kind of archetypes of people who fall into this nun category. These three archetypes are based on my research of the nun population, and they all come at the same place, but from different perspectives and for different reasons. And so an examiner is someone who is really concerned about facts and knowledge and chooses to be none. A socializer is just happy with living until they hit a crossroads and they don't know how to cope with it. And then that's when they're more inclined to face kind of these deeper existential questions. And then the orphaned Christian are those people who've been wounded by religion. And it's not just Christians, it can happen in other religions too, but in our country, it's primarily Christians, former Christians. And they're really craving community right now. So American Nun is designed for these cultural pioneers. I'm going to stop sharing now and see if anybody has any questions about this, about these demographics before we move on. And I'm sorry, I'm just now getting to the comments, and I don't know if I have the wherewithal to read through them all while we're talking, but are there any questions before we move on? You can just speak up.
It seems there's a question here, Rachel. How about multiple religious belongings like Christian and Buddhist?
Yes. I used to describe myself as a, how did I describe it? It's kind of like a Buddhist, Taoist, Christian, Al-Anon person, because my spiritual formation had been, really impacted by these different sources. And I think that many, if not most, nuns would fall into that category. And that's one of the reasons why, and that's one of the reasons I personally finally had to admit to myself that I was a nun, was because I realized that I could not say that only Christianity and only the teachings of Jesus had been powerfully instrumental in my spiritual development. And so I had to reject all labels so that I could then embrace truth from wherever it came from. I see Camille's comment about being a non-judgmental Christian, and I think that kind of ties into the idea that can you be quote unquote a Christian nun, and that depends on how you define nun. And for the purpose of American Nun, we define being nun as simply believing that love is greater than labels. And so, because the question is, what came first? God created love, or love is a reflection, or God is a reflection of love. And so when you believe that love is greater than labels, then our labels don't have to divide us, they can unite us when we realize that the power of love unites us.
I really kind of thought about that, because I felt like when I was taking the quiz, my answers to a lot of the questions were like, maybe,
Yeah, I know.
Like
I
thought about one particular one that I can think of was do you think that pastors who get wealthy through the church are favored by God? And I'm like, maybe, but that also doesn't mean that they're good stewards of it, or that they do the right thing with it. And so so there were multiple questions where I was like kind of on the fence of also like, well, do you believe that you should like that volunteerism is like more important than paying tithes? And like, I believe they're both important, so that sort of thing. But I felt that I got rising nun in my answer, And I never considered myself as a nun before, but I think a lot of my answers, I answered the way I did because I just try to be non-judgmental and try to say, this is my walk with God, and I hope everybody has, some walk with God, but I'm not going to judge you. It's not my place I'm not the judge. So, I guess those were my thoughts. There's another question that says, you noted that nuns are different from New Age. Could you unpack that a little bit?
Yes. So one of the things that and for everything I'm about to say, there's always an exception to any rule, just like in Christianity, there's a million different denominations and so forth. But generally speaking, nuns are very embracing of science and reason, and they're not looking for woo-woo. So some of the reasons that people have defected from Christianity is that they're like, man, in my heart of hearts, I really don't believe Jesus rose from the dead. I can buy it metaphorically, but I don't believe it literally. And so I feel disingenuous to go to church and say this when I don't really believe it. And so it's the adherence to the principles of science and reason that is one of the reasons why nuns have become nuns. And so not to be confused with New Age, because New Age tends to, use a lot of fantastical beliefs themselves. Whether it's astrology or, tarot cards or whatever different, kind of fantastical beliefs they have within their belief system. And I'm not making a judgment call on that. I'm just saying that that set of fantastical beliefs compared to other beliefs that suspend, the rules of science and so forth, leaves nuns out of both of those categories. Does that make sense? Yes. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
I grew up Catholic, and when I was at SMU, I really enjoyed the Catholic community at Perkins Chapel and things like that. But as I've gotten older, there are things that I have, kind of say, well, I don't know if I agree with that, or I don't agree with, the non-inclusivity, part of Catholicism, or some of these things I just kind of let go. But there's so many things that it might be maybe the more spiritual things about Catholicism, or it might be, being kind to others and those kinds of ways of living that I've wanted to live, and I wanted my family to live that way. And it seems like to say, even though I came out as none and done, which I don't even know exactly what that means, but I kind of wonder if by saying you're a nun, isn't that like saying I'm Catholic, because you're pushing away some of the other religions by giving yourself a label? Isn't nun just another label?
Yes, that's a great question. I love that question. In fact, I actually deal with that question on the FAQ section of my website on the About page. And that's honestly just a reflection of the limitations of language. Because none is basically an anti-label label. And I'm very much aware of that. And it's just simply a reflection of, we use words to convey ideas, and there's no other way to convey the idea without having a word for it. And but that's part of the richness of it too. And also on my website, I believe it's on the About page, I discussed the idea that even one of the reasons I personally love the term nun is because it is both everything and nothing at the same time. And when you really, I've been greatly influenced by mystical study of Buddhist and Christian mysticism, and it takes you to this place of nothingness that then end up being everything. And in the term nun is the word one. And nuns acknowledge and honor and appreciate the oneness of everything. And so there's the oneness of everything encouched in the notion that we don't limit that there's no label for it. And so it gets kind of mentally, wormhole a little bit. And honestly, if I do my job well in establishing American Nun as an organization and a social impact company, it will be a term that we as a culture can define what it means. And it's not going to be easy in the sense that it's not simple, like I'm for the red team, it's there's nuance, there's sophistication to what we're talking about here. But the truth of the matter is, I think most people really crave to have a sense of deep connection to others. And so for people who are remotely looking for community, who are in this space, I think there will be some really rich conversation about what this term will come to mean in the popular parlance. Because from a demographer's perspective, it's very clear cut. You just check this box, none of the above. But in terms of how we live it out, it becomes much more rich. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it kind of answers it. It makes me think that your mission moving forward as American nun, you're going to have trouble because it takes time to explain, like
It does.
the nunness or the oneness of being nun,
Mm-hmm.
and that might be a hurdle for a lot of folks. But I think it's really interesting, and I do like the one in nun, but I also see the no in one. So I get worried about that too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, hey, Camille, can I use a colorful word just for the purpose of illustration?
It's your talk.
All right. So you think about the word, let's just take the word bitch. All right. That has been, okay, I asked, but that's been a word that was negatively charged, really negatively charged for a long, long time. And now it's just commonly used. Girls, friends talk about it all the time, just or call each other that just in joking sometimes or something like that. It's become a word that's become owned and repurposed. And I'm not suggesting it's the best word on the planet or whatever, but there's lots of words that you can find that have been that were negatively charged, and then instead of letting it remain a negatively charged word in our culture, the group who had been called that takes ownership of it and says, this is what this means. I'm going to tell you what this word means. And it might be something you turn into something fun, or it might be something that has more meaning. So I actually look at the challenge because Greg, I don't have my glasses on, so I just read your name. So Greg, what you say, that's true. That will definitely be a hurdle, so to speak. But I actually look at that hurdle as an opportunity to say, listen, there's 100 million people in our country alone who are in this space. And with the power of social media and the coupled with the truth of the message that there are people in this space and we need to find one another, it gives us an opportunity to define it rather than to be caught up in, the hindrance of it. That's how I choose to look at it.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds good. And I imagine the people that would just think of nun as a complete negative might be the people that wouldn't be nuns anyway.
Yeah, that might be true. That's probably very true. So then I was going to segue into just real quickly, high level, what is American Nun as a company or as a business? I describe American Nun as a social impact company that fuels a movement. The movement has been in existence over the past, really over the past several decades, but it's really gained momentum in the past 2 decades. But it has not reached the critical mass point yet where the public has full consciousness of it yet. And so that's what I want. One of the things I want American Nun to be as a community organization is to help push past that and reach that critical mass point where we can all look around like meerkats and pop out of our holes and look around and go, oh, I'm one and you're one too. And then realize that we're everywhere. And so there are other social movements that parallel this phenomenon of we've always been there, but we didn't know that we were all there. You can use the LGBTQ movement over the past few decades as a parallel. The mental health movement in the past decade or so where it's finally people are being honest about the fact that that mental health is something that we need to address, and it doesn't mean you're a bad person. And so as we start to come forward and be honest with these things, we will find unity in our numbers. The social impact company part of American Nun is to be an online content resource for people in this space. And I'm going to give a personal illustration as to how I came to this realization that there was a need for this in the online content marketplace. When I was just in the past decade, I spent about 8 years as a single mother with 3 children and couldn't make enough money to take care of us all. I had a lot of stress. It's a very, very difficult job to be a single mom, particularly with multiple kids. And it was a really hard time. And during that time is when I was also reconciling the fact that I didn't neatly fit into the Christian box. And so I wanted spiritual resources. I wanted to know, how do I make it through this period that's so challenging for me? But if I go talk to somebody at church, they're going to tell me something that doesn't really resonate with what I really believe in my orientation to the world. But if I go read, let's say, a book about single parenthood or whatever, it's just going to be some dry academic something. And I couldn't find this space that really merged the value set that I had as a nun, even though at the time I didn't know I was, with the spiritual need. And so that's when, and I felt, honestly, I felt very alone. Very alone. I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. And that's not meant to be a sad story. It's just meant to illustrate that there are millions of people like I was at that time that are like, I don't fit into any one category, but yet I still believe in this spiritual connection and something bigger than myself. And I don't believe in fantastical things, but I value science, but but neither does just simply scientific answers to problems soothe my soul. So this idea of having a content company for nuns is to help mitigate the navigation of life for people as they reach different milestones, crossroads, the ups and the downs of life. They have a community and a content library that will help them navigate their experience. There are some analogs out there that are like this, but that don't deal with the nun demographic. So there's Gaia.com is a new age online content company. And if you go to their website, you'll see, that they definitely specialize in the new age crowd. There are some other online content companies that specifically deal with different religions, but there's nothing for the nun space. And so that's the business concept in a very high level nutshell. Any questions about that or comments?
I'm just wondering, how are you going to reach all demographics? Since the statistics you pulled up earlier showed that it was, what was it, 18 to 25-year-olds or so that were like majorly a part of this religion, like 40%, or not religion, but demographic, 40%. How do you appeal to them? Because like, I'm 21, I'm only here because I'm weird and curious about everything, but I know literally no one else is like that. So how?
Well, for one thing, I was going to say the weirdness in me honors the weirdness in you. So, so that's awesome. Weird people are welcome. But firstly, obviously, one of the main platforms will be social media. And being a Gen X person, that is not my forte. So that's why I have reached out. I'm working now with a 20-year-old intern at SMU to help me with that. And he's like, your Instagram page sucks. And I'm like, I know, because it's not what I do. But again, to answer your question, I believe that when you speak truth to a ready audience, then it will take care of itself. Social media will be the primary engine for reaching the audience at first. And there's all kinds of layers of strategy that go into that in terms of optimizing social media reach. And then, of course, on another level, from a business perspective, there will be, if I do my job right, and as I work to get this company funded, PR. So you'll do bottom down from PR media to get the message out, and then from the bottom up with social media or organically to grow it. I've already, even though my Instagram page is not so stellar at the moment, because it's a reflection of my Instagram skills, not somebody talented. I've already met countless people who are, most of them are in their 20s, who are dying to have connection with other people in this space. I've had offline conversations with them, and there is a hunger for people to be able to be honest about how they really feel about what's being asked of them from a religious perspective, and how they really feel about themselves as spiritual people, without having to believe things that they really don't believe, or try to believe things they don't really believe. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And it's funny because literally everything you've said is just incredibly obvious to me. Like everybody, almost everybody I meet is either like super hardcore religious or just like this. So
That's right. And the people who are, quote, just like this, there's not a space for there's not a unified space for them right now in the public sphere to connect and to have conversation. Now, there's lots of hashtags on Instagram where people are having all these one-off conversations, but there's nothing that pulls them all together. And that's one of the things that I hope to do with American Nun. All right, let's see. Trying to read the questions here. If I see a hand up, does that mean somebody wants to talk? I see hands on some of the, Camille?
Yes, you guys can just unmute and ask your question. Linda, if you want to start.
Well, I think there were questions in the chat first. So, hey, Rachel, go ahead and answer written questions. And then I just had a couple of thoughts based on what you were saying. So,
Okay.
and a question. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
No,
Let's
go
see
ahead
here.
go ahead with Linda's, because mine actually
Okay.
isn't related to what you were just saying. It's actually asking you a question about your business model. So,
Oh, okay.
Linda, would you go first?
Okay, sure, thank you. So it actually relates to what others have brought up too. So I'm one of the old folks, and you know, Rachel, when we talked earlier, and I've got your book and had taken the quiz, I was really surprised when I found out that, you know, most of my beliefs fit the nun principles, and yet I'm very happily Jewish and would not consider myself to be totally non-religious, but I do feel a sense of potential for coexistence, that
Yes.
I don't feel it's necessary to choose between religion and non-religion, that it is more a way of life, philosophy, culture, you know, humanity, and there's religion in there, but it doesn't rule my life. I don't make all my decisions by it, but you know, it's an important social family and friend environment for me to go to services. And the LGBT congregation, it's small and very friendly in Dallas, and it's, you know, another network. So, you know, I think that there is a lot of possibility and flexibility. And so, yes, I'm a Jewish nun. So we have puns on several levels.
Yes,
to our Catholic friends.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I wasn't sure if there was a question or not that you wanted to. Well, you raise a good point, though, Linda, that, and that's what's also a huge distinction between the movement of the nuns versus the atheist movement of the 20th century is that nuns are not anti-religion at all. They're just saying it's not me. That's all they're saying. Hey, if it works for you, that's awesome. Nobody's casting aspersions in terms of if it works for you, great. It just doesn't, it's just not my bag. And so, but I will, as long as you're talking about puns or irony, I will say, and I think this is something that's important to me, although I haven't really written about it yet, but I wouldn't have the luxury to be a nun if it hadn't been for the rich heritage of multiple religions and the religious people who have brought that forward. Like I've learned from so many different influencers and influential thought. And so I have a deep indebtedness to Christianity and Buddhism and Taoism and all, some of the other thought systems that have just been super influential. So it's like you can't have the yin without the yang, right? I mean, so the only reason I have the luxury to be a nun is because other wonderful humans have carried forward these traditions. Okay,
Great.
Emily.
Yeah, okay, good, Emily.
Hi, I just have a question. I feel like I've been a nun all my life, child of an orphan Christian. And one question that I do have is, in your parallels to the LGBTQ and mental health space, arguably those are biological aspects of a human being that cannot be changed and are not a choice, whereas I understand being born into a family of a particular religious upbringing might make it feel like you don't have a choice, but you will always, you could change that and not change your, I guess, have to go as far as changing your gender or something with the government on that level. So just curious how you would respond to that question.
About the role of biology, and I'm
Well,
sorry, you missed it.
Yeah, so in making this parallel to the nun being, it's not a religion, and it doesn't seem to have a dogma, which is what a religion would have, but then comparing it to movements such as LGBTQ and mental health, whereas arguably LGBTQ and mental health are things that are born out of people who have biologically driven differences from what is typically thought of as mainstream. And then nuns, it's more of like a philosophical difference.
Okay. So you're saying why would I draw upon those parallels? Is that basically what you're saying? Because there's not necessarily biology involved with choosing to be a nun or being a nun?
Yes, or just, I guess, also wondering if there is reason to think that maybe those communities or movements may take offense to that in some way.
Well, for one thing, if they do or would, I would love to hear it, because there's definitely no intention to be offensive. The reason I used those as parallels was because what I was saying is that, LGBTQ people have always existed, but they didn't always have a safe space to live authentically and live forwardly who they are. And so the way it's evolved culturally is that it took certain incidences over the course of the last few decades for people to finally come forward, notably the AIDS crisis of the 80s, for people to come forward and be willing to start to shatter the preconceptions of what it is to be LGBTQ. And now it's much more, thankfully, acceptable in our culture to let people be who they are. And I was just drawing that parallel, saying the same thing with nuns is that it hasn't traditionally been safe to say, I'm not into organized religion, because then you get branded an atheist, and then that stokes a lot of fear in people. And so I'm saying that as nuns start to come forward and say, you know what, I'm going to be honest, and this is who I am. And if I look around, there are people just like me all over the landscape. So I wasn't really trying to draw a parallel. I was just trying to draw a parallel from a cultural evolution perspective of how a movement of people who've always existed but didn't feel safe can eventually rise to the surface and say, be honest, and then we can create a safe space. And that's one of the reasons why I'm leading with this notion that love is greater than labels, because this isn't an anti-movement. This is I'm going to love you through being honest with who I am kind of thing. And that should be disarming. However, it is worth noting, since you brought up biology, that, you know, we've evolved a lot in terms of how we think about things. And I use the analogy of, you know, it used to be acceptable 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, however long ago, for certain religions to sacrifice babies or to sacrifice goats or whatever. And I'm like, we don't sacrifice goats anymore. We evolved past that. And so now we're going through a whole nother shedding of the skin. And we're saying, you know, there are certain things that maybe you can really have a deep connection with God, or whatever your higher power is, or whatever you consider to be greater than yourself, without having to believe that the laws of physics had to be defied in order to prove that you believe or have this spiritual connection in your life. And so that's just kind of an evolution of thought that I think is being challenged right now in mainstream religion by the defection of nuns.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Looks like
Okay,
we have a question from Adam Brown.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
thank you
Adam.
so much for doing this. I had a question. You mentioned that this movement is not anti anything, and not anti-religion. But would this movement oppose religions enforcing hateful doctrine? Like, I was raised Catholic. I find that the Catholic Church is very hateful against LGBTQ people, as I am one of those people. That's an opinion. Although, would it be, say, if a religion was harming human rights or human dignity, would it be so bold as to say that none would oppose that as a default?
Yes, I addressed that question on my about page of the website as well. And the way that I put it is, nuns are not anti-religion. We are anti the abuse of religion. And then if you want to be even more specific, we're anti-abuse. You know, it's like you can use politics, you can use religion, you can use economics, whatever, to abuse people. And it's just that, yeah, so yes. But in the creation of this organization, and in the creation of the brand DNA and everything that I want this organization to be about as we lead the movement, I want to lead with what we're for, and but be honest about the things that, yeah, absolutely, because honestly, love involves standing up against abuse. So if love is greater than labels, then we got to live it. We got to say that, you know, homie, don't play that. That's a 1990s reference. So if you didn't watch it Live in Color, then you may not know that, but.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rachel, I have a question.
Yeah.
So I often think that religions broadly provide rituals throughout our life, whether it's birth or circumcision, weddings, funerals, baptisms, coming of age rituals, bar mitzvahs. How do nuns as a group do these life life event rituals. I know you can go to the Justice of the Peace and get married, and there's lots of things around weddings, but how do nuns find some of that ritual in those life passages?
I really appreciate that question, Tracy Ann. And that's actually one of that's part of my strategic plan for American Nun as an organization, is to have a platform to share ideas about that. But research shows that one of the chief rituals that many nuns tend to do on a regular basis is to share meals with friends. And so it's Sunday brunch kind of thing. And so that has become kind of the new church for a lot of nuns. Is millennials started it, where they would meet on Sunday mornings and have community together, and then talk about their week and what's bothering them, and what's working and not working, and so forth. But there are other ways to have those rituals, and that's part of my business plan. That's precisely what we will be addressing. It's like, how do you go through, you graduate from high school, what do you do when you're trying to figure out what you want to major in, and your career choices, and then dating, and then marriage and babies, and blah blah blah. I have several things that I've been doing with my kids for several years. We have a blessing jar on our kitchen table with little scraps of paper, and we write down something that we're grateful for when we eat, put it in the jar. And then on New Year's Eve, after a year of notes, we dump it out and we all read them together. And then we start over for the next year. That's just one example. So that kind of replaced prayer for us at our table, was the practice of gratitude. And I've shared that on my personal Instagram page, I think, that particular ritual. And so there's lots of little ways to find those rituals, because you're right, humans need them, but it's being reinvented. I think another ritual that has kind of supplanted religious ritual has been going to yoga for a lot of women, particularly, and men, but for a lot of millennial women, they would go to yoga, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 6 p.m. or whatever with their mat. And this is my community. This is where I get my sense of spirituality, and it becomes their ritual. So there are things that have replaced religious rituals, but I think there's lots of space to really start to have conversation and start to share ideas about finding ritual in our daily lives.